Uncle, please read this. It is a reminder for you.
Emily, wait. What is this?
Don't panic, it's a trap. Maid's daughter slips a note. Veteran realizes she saved his life. The paper was small enough to disappear in his palm, yet it hit Michael Thompson harder than any blast he'd outrun overseas. 5 words, scrawled in a child's uneven hand, stared up from the fold like a fuse. Don't panic, it's a trap. He was alone in the second-floor office of the New England Veteran Center, the hallway lights humming, the banner for that night's anniversary gala rolled and waiting by the door. He had just finished cross-checking the seating plan for the Boston Veterans Hall when the girl appeared. Emily Rodriguez, 10 years old, blue eyes too big for her pale face. She stepped in without a knock, pressed the note into his hand with fingers cold as ice, and vanished before he could speak her name. Michael stood, heart thudding with an old, unwelcome rhythm. He had learned to distrust coincidence long before he retired as a major from military intelligence. Traps arrived dressed like routine. Ambushes wore familiar faces. The word itself, trap, rattled loose a drawer of memories he preferred nailed shut. Outside his window, dusk bled into the city's red brick seam, streetlights winking on one by one. The gala would begin in 4 hours. Donors, Gold Star families, former teammates, a stage, a flag line, a microphone with his name on the program, public, predictable, perfect. He dialed a number he had promised himself never to use again. Jacob Miller picked up on the first ring, the same dry, unruffled voice Michael remembered from joint briefings with the CIA. "You don't call unless you have to," Jacob said. "So what do you have?" "A note," Michael answered, "from a child." "The oldest trick in the book," Jacob murmured, "because no one suspects a child." A second call went out to Sergeant David Chen, now with the Boston FBI Task Force and lead on gala security. Michael kept his voice even, the way he had on radios that crackled under fire. "Find Susan Rodriguez and her daughter, now." By the time he set the phone down, he'd already locked his office, killed the lights, and pocketed the note. His father's warning, spoken first in a kitchen that smelled of coffee and gun oil, came back like a psalm. The enemy you never suspect is the one that kills you. Michael moved down the stairwell without hurry, eyes soft but wide, seeing corners the way soldiers do. He didn't panic. He planned. And somewhere in the noise of the evening commute, a little girl who shouldn't have known any of this had just saved his life. Boston in early autumn was always a contradiction. Streets glazed with the amber glow of street lamps, but air sharp enough to sting the lungs. Outside the New England Veteran Center, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, students spilling out of coffee shops, cabs blaring horns, the rustle of newspapers tucked under elbows. Inside, though, the world Michael Thompson had built for himself was different. The Veteran Center had been his post-war mission, his way of making sense of years spent in shadows. The building itself was an old brick schoolhouse converted into offices, rec halls, and a modest auditorium. On the walls hung framed photographs of veterans from every war, their eyes following you down the hallways, some proud, some tired, some forever young. The smell of polished wood mingled with faint coffee grounds, and every creak of the old staircase reminded Michael that history still lived here. Michael, at 48, still carried himself like a man on duty. He was lean, his posture ramrod straight, even when he tried to relax. His dark hair had thinned at the temples, streaked silver, but his eyes, sharp gray, almost cold, missed little. He dressed simply, pressed shirt sleeves, slacks, and boots scuffed in a way no polish could erase. To most of the younger staff, he was the kind of leader you didn't want to disappoint. Measured, quiet, decisive. To the older veterans, he was the son of Colonel Mark Thompson, the Vietnam hero whose legend still hung heavy in Boston's military circles. It wasn't easy living under that shadow, but Michael had carved his own name through 18 years in Army intelligence and special operations. He had built a reputation for instincts you couldn't teach, the kind that pulled men out of ambushes and sniffed out lies across dinner tables. When he retired, people expected him to vanish into academia, think tanks, or corporate security. Instead, he had chosen this: community work, fundraisers, and the slow, unglamorous grind of making sure forgotten veterans ate 3 meals a day. Around him moved the people who made the center feel alive. Susan Rodriguez, the part-time cleaner, was a widow of the Iraq War. Her husband lost to an IED outside Fallujah. She was quiet, steady, and carried herself with the stoic grace of someone who had known grief too well. She brought her daughter Emily with her most evenings, the little girl sitting with homework in the corner while Susan scrubbed offices. Emily rarely spoke, but when she did, her voice was soft, almost apologetic, as though afraid to disturb the air. Then there was David Chin, the sergeant-turned-FBI agent, whose loyalty to Michael went back to Black Ops missions in dusty corners of the Middle East. David was younger, mid-30s, broad-shouldered, with an easy grin that covered a mind as tactical as Michael's. He had been the one Michael leaned on to design security for the gala, a night where donors and veterans would fill the Boston Veterans Hall, a building restored with years of grassroots fundraising. David swore the place was locked down tight. Still, the note burned in Michael's pocket. As he paced the second floor, he thought about Jacob Miller, the retired CIA officer who lived outside the city. Jacob looked like a school teacher, his thinning hair and tweed jackets a perfect disguise, but Michael knew better. Behind Jacob's calm eyes lay decades of espionage, manipulation, and the ability to read people like maps. Calling Jacob tonight had been instinct, not reason, and Michael knew it would draw him into something far darker than gala speeches and champagne. The Veterans Gala itself loomed over all of them. It wasn't just a dinner. It was a show of solidarity, of remembrance. The hall would be filled with men and women whose lives had been shaped by service. Families would bring photographs of the fallen. Politicians would mingle with veterans in battered leather jackets. The press would snap photos. It was the kind of event you couldn't stage again if it went wrong, which made it the perfect place for an ambush. Michael returned to his desk and studied the photograph propped by his lamp. His father, Colonel Mark Thompson, standing tall in jungle fatigues, eyes hard as stone. The old man's voice came back in fragments, warnings passed down like heirlooms. Trust earned slowly. Question everything. The enemy doesn't knock, they sit at your table. Downstairs, he heard Susan locking her cleaning cart, her voice calling softly to Emily. He leaned against the window frame, watching the mother and daughter step out into the cold night. Emily's small hand clutched her mother's sleeve, her school backpack bouncing against her shoulder. A fragile pair, yet somehow the key to the storm gathering over his head. Michael straightened, The stage was set. The center, the gala, the people he trusted, and the ones he didn't. All of them about to collide. And the most important clue had come not from an FBI agent or a CIA veteran, but from a frightened child who barely spoke above a whisper. The trap was real. The only question was who had set it and how deep it ran. The Boston Veterans Hall gleamed that night, its marble floors polished until they shone like mirrors beneath the weight of chandeliers. Rows of flags lined the walls, their colors muted in the golden light. The gala had the hum of ceremony, waiters gliding between tables, cameras flashing, veterans in dress coats shaking hands with donors in tuxedos. To the casual eye, it was a celebration of sacrifice. To Michael, with Emily's note in his pocket, it looked like a battlefield waiting for the first shot. From the moment he stepped inside, his instincts prickled. He scanned the crowd as if reading a dossier. At one table, his sister Eleanor smiled too brightly. Her hand looped around the arm of her husband, Richard Blackwood. Richard's reputation had traveled faster than he had. Once a promising intelligence officer, cashiered for corruption and irregularities no one bothered to name. He had been living in the shadows since, and Michael never trusted the way his eyes wandered through a room, always calculating. Then there was Robert, Michael's younger brother, in his Pentagon dress blues. He wore his medals like a dare, smiling at acquaintances while stealing glances at Michael, his jaw set. Envy rolled off him like heat. Any one of them could have been an ally once. Anyone could be the knife now. Madge Thompson. A voice broke through his thoughts. A young volunteer in a server's jacket approached with a tray of crystal flutes. Compliments of the committee. Michael's hand went halfway to the glass before a slight shift in the crowd caught his eye. Jacob Miller was leaning against a column near the back, looking like an old man waiting for his ride, but his head tilted in the faintest shake. "Don't." Michael brushed the tray away politely. "No, thank you." The server's smile thinned. He pivoted and offered the drinks to 3 other veterans at nearby tables. Each declined with visible unease. The boy's jaw tightened. He walked briskly toward the kitchen, phone already in his hand. Jacob reached Michael minutes later, his voice low. That drink wasn't courtesy, it was delivery. A fast-acting sedative. You'd be awake enough to move, but not to fight. Classic rendition play. Michael's gut turned cold. The trap wasn't metaphor anymore, it had teeth, and they were already in the building. Then came the humiliation. The gala's MC tapped the microphone, introducing Michael as the night's keynote. Applause rippled through the hall, polite but warm. He walked to the stage, the lights hot on his face. But halfway into his speech, the fire alarm shrieked. The chandeliers flickered, then went black. The hall dissolved into chaos. Chairs scraping, shouts rising, families clutching children. Emergency lights blinked to life, casting everything in a bloody red glow. And in that stuttering light, Michael caught sight of Richard Blackwood rising too quickly from his table, phone pressed tight to his ear. Eleanor grabbed his sleeve, whispering something sharp, but Richard pulled away. David Chen materialized at Michael's side, hand to his earpiece. "This isn't an accident," he said. "Our servers just went dark. Entire veteran database, names, addresses, missions, all being copied out right now." Michael froze. The trap wasn't just for him. It was for thousands, men and women whose identities could be sold to the highest bidder, turned into targets overnight. The humiliation was clear. In front of a hall full of the people he had sworn to protect, the enemy had outplayed him, cutting through the very security he had overseen. If the data walked out of this building, every family with a veteran in it would be in danger. And all he had was the warning of a child, a suspicious drink, and the knowledge that someone he trusted sat at the center of the betrayal. He stepped down from the podium into the chaos, his voice a hard whisper to David. "Seal the exits, find the servers. I don't care what it takes. We're taking this fight underground." The war Michael thought he'd left behind had just followed him home. The crowd still churned in panic, a storm of voices echoing off the marble. But in Michael's mind, the sounds fell away. The fire alarm, the shouts, even David's commands over the comms, all dissolved into the old rhythm of combat. He was back in the shadows again, where instinct ruled, where hesitation killed, and memory flooded in. He had been 23 when he joined the intelligence branch of Special Operations. His father, Colonel Mark Thompson, had told him bluntly at the kitchen table, "You won't earn your name carrying mine. You'll earn it carrying men out of hell." That line had seared itself into Michael's marrow. At Fort Bragg, the instructors called him relentless. He would run until his lungs screamed, crawl until his elbows bled, parse encrypted comms until dawn while others slept. But what set him apart wasn't brute endurance. It was an ability to read the battlefield, not just the terrain, but the people, to sense deception in a handshake, danger in the pitch of silence before a firefight. His first mission was in Bosnia, covert support for NATO forces. They had tracked a smuggling ring, moving arms through civilian convoys. Michael spotted it, not in the weapons themselves, but in the mismatched paperwork. Dates too perfect, signatures that trembled in ways forged ones never did. The bust had saved lives, and for the first time, his father had looked at him not as a son, but as a soldier. From there, it spiraled into darker theaters, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, places where the sun baked sand into steel and night cloaked betrayals. Michael learned languages in fragments, lived out of rucksacks, kept dossiers not just on targets, but on teammates, because trust could be fatal if misplaced, and always there was the cost. He still saw Lopez's face, one of his men in Kandahar, caught in a blast when a source they trusted flipped sides. He remembered the scream cut short, the cloud of dust, the ringing in his ears. He remembered the way guilt gnawed at him later in silent tents when no one was left to hear. But the deepest scar came not overseas, but at home. His brother Robert, jealous, ambitious, always chasing approval. In childhood, Robert had called him perfect soldier, half joke, half sneer. When Michael's commendations piled up, Robert chose Washington, Pentagon postings, political corridors. They were different battlefields, but both demanded power. And in Robert's eyes, Michael had stolen the legacy of their father. Worse still was Eleanor, sweet, steady Eleanor, who had patched up soldiers' bodies as an army medic. She had been Michael's anchor through rough deployments, her letters lifting him when everything else was ash. Until the court-martial, a misplaced report, an allegation of negligence. Michael knew she had been framed, but she had been dismissed, her career stripped. That was when Richard Blackwood slid into her life. Richard, with his easy charm and poisonous ambition. Michael had worked with him once in Kabul, back when Richard was an intelligence officer. Even then, Michael had seen the cracks, the shortcuts, the bribes whispered through interpreters, the way he bent loyalty into currency. When Richard was dishonorably discharged, Michael wasn't surprised. What stunned him was Eleanor forgiving him enough to marry him. Michael had always suspected Richard's hands in Eleanor's downfall, but suspicion wasn't proof. And without proof, he could only watch as his sister's life twisted around a man who had no loyalty to anything but power. Now, in the chaos of the Boston Gala, it all clicked. The database raid, the tainted drinks, the carefully timed blackout. This wasn't random. It was orchestrated by someone who knew his patterns, his network, his vulnerabilities. Someone who had waited for a stage large enough to humiliate him, to unmake him in front of the very community he had tried to protect. And Richard Blackwood was the obvious suspect. But Eleanor's presence cut deeper, because if she stood beside Richard willingly, it meant betrayal from the one person Michael had always believed incapable of turning against him. The memory of her binding his wounds with trembling hands, of her whispering, "You're the strong one, but don't forget you're human too," collided with the reality of her cold eyes at the dinner table earlier that night. Major, Jacob Miller's voice yanked him back to the present. The old spy appeared beside him, blending into the frantic crowd like a shadow. His hand clutched his shoulder bag, but his eyes were alive, sharp. "You're thinking what I'm thinking." Michael gave a short nod. "Richard, and your sister," Jacob said flatly. The words landed like shrapnel. David Chen pushed through, breathless. The fire alarm was triggered manually. And the servers, someone's already inside. They're pulling data. Every covert veteran we've got in the archives. Michael's jaw set. Then we don't have time for suspicion. We act. Jacob's gaze lingered on him. "Your family's in this, Major. You ready to treat them like enemies if you have to?" Michael didn't answer immediately. His chest felt like a vice. But then he remembered Lopez. He remembered the families who would suffer if names leaked. Assassins hunting men who thought they'd left the war behind, widows stalked, children kidnapped. He thought of Emily, slipping him the note with shaking fingers. He drew a long breath. "If they've chosen the other side, then yes, I'm ready." Jacob nodded once, like a priest blessing a confession. "Then let's go hunting." The tunnels beneath the Boston Veterans Hall had been sealed decades ago, relics of Cold War paranoia. But Michael knew they were still there, maintenance passages running under the building designed for evacuation if the city ever faced an attack. When the blackout hit, he and Jacob slipped into one of those passages, their flashlights slicing through concrete gloom. "Data centers 2 levels down," Jacob murmured, his voice hushed but steady. "If they're in the servers, we've got maybe 15 minutes before the transfer completes." Michael's boots echoed in the tunnel, each step drawing him closer not just to the attackers, but to a reckoning years in the making. He kept his breathing slow, controlled, his combat instincts sliding back into place like an old uniform. At the far end of the corridor, a silhouette moved, tall, broad, carrying himself with the ease of a man who'd been trained once but had traded discipline for brute swagger. Richard Blackwood. He carried a pistol low at his side, flashlight mounted, the beam swaying like a predator's tail. Behind him was Eleanor. She looked pale in the harsh light, her medical bag slung across her shoulder as though this were just another field hospital. But her eyes, hard, resolved, betrayed that this was no accident. She had chosen her side. "Michael," Richard called, his voice echoing down the corridor. always one step behind. I should thank you for making tonight possible." Michael didn't flinch. "You're stealing identities of men and women who bled for this country, selling them to the highest bidder. You think that's winning?" Richard smirked. "Winning is survival, and survival is money, leverage, power. I was cast out, remember? I made my own way." Eleanor's voice trembled, but she forced the words out. "You never saw me, Michael. Not when I was drowning in reports. Not when one mistake ended everything. Richard did. He gave me purpose again." Michael's chest tightened. This was the sister who had saved his life once, kneeling in a field hospital, pressing bandages into wounds with bloody hands. And now she stood beside the man dismantling everything he had sworn to protect. Jacob leaned close, whispering just loud enough for Michael to hear. "This is it. The trap's sprung. Either you let them finish, or you turn it here and now." The corridor pulsed with tension. Richard raised his pistol, but not yet to fire, only to taunt, to dominate. "Walk away, Major. Let me finish, and I'll let you keep your little community center. Otherwise—" He trailed off, eyes glittering. Michael stepped forward, calm, deliberate, every muscle honed to strike. "I don't walk away," he said, voice low and hard. "Not from enemies, and not from family who chose to become enemies." The words dropped like iron. The decision was made. There was no going back. Richard's smirk faltered. Eleanor's lips parted, her breath catching. Jacob's hand tightened on the strap of his bag, ready to draw steel if it came to it. And for the first time that night, the trap shifted. It was no longer Richard's game. It was Michael's battlefield again. The blast doors to the sub-basement shuddered as Richard keyed in a stolen code. He pushed Eleanor through first, his pistol still drawn. The hum of machines swelled. The data center, rows of server towers glowing with green and red LEDs, each light a heartbeat of the veteran archive. Michael and Jacob slipped in moments later, hugging the shadows. Michael's senses sharpened, cataloging every sound, the low whir of cooling fans, the crunch of Richard's boots on concrete, Eleanor's ragged breathing. His pulse slowed, just as it had in ambush zones overseas. Richard glanced back, catching them in the doorway. His grin widened. "You came all this way just to watch me finish the job. Poetic, isn't it? A Thompson watching the legacy of America's finest burn." He held up a small black transmitter. The red safety cover was already flipped open. "C4 lined in the racks," he said casually. "Enough to turn this basement into dust. The data walks out on my drive, and no one traces a thing." Jacob stepped forward, calm as stone. "You'll never make it out. You know that." Richard shrugged. "That's why I don't have to. I have buyers who'll finish what I started. I'll be remembered as the man who broke the untouchables. History doesn't care about survivors. It cares about legends." Michael's voice cut through the whine of servers. "Legends are built on sacrifice, Richard, not betrayal." Richard barked a laugh. "Sacrifice? Don't pretend you're noble. How many names did you erase for your missions? How many pawns did you move to save your skin? Don't lecture me about betrayal." Before Michael could answer, Eleanor raised her pistol. Her hand shook, but her eyes locked on her brother. "Don't move," she said. "Please, Michael, don't make me choose." Michael's chest tightened. "You already chose." Her face crumpled, but she didn't lower the gun. Jacob's hand brushed against his bag, then the ambush. A shadow detached from the racks. A masked operative, professional, not biker muscle. He lunged. Jacob pivoted, striking with a practiced elbow. The two crashed into a server tower, sparks spitting from cables. Eleanor cried out, her shot ringing wide. Richard seized the chaos. He bolted toward the main console, fingers flying across the keyboard. On the screen, a progress bar crept past 70%, data siphoning out into the ether. Michael charged, closing the distance. Richard whipped around, firing wild. Bullets ricocheted off steel. Michael ducked, tackled him against the console. The transmitter clattered to the floor, sliding under a rack. They grappled, grunting, straining. Richard fought like a man cornered, desperation lending him feral strength. But Michael fought with training drilled into muscle memory, every movement precise, controlled. He hooked Richard's arm, twisted, slammed him down. Richard snarled, spitting blood. "You can't stop it!" Michael drove a knee into his chest, pinning him. "Watch me." He reached for the console, fingers flying over keys. Training from long nights in intel units guided him, cutting power, isolating servers, aborting transfers. But the bar had already reached 93%. "Michael!" Jacob shouted, locked in a chokehold with the masked operative. Blood trickled from his lip. "Forget the data. Stop the bomb." Michael's eyes darted to the transmitter glinting under the rack. Richard lunged again, knocking him sideways. The transmitter slid further, its light blinking. Eleanor screamed. She dropped her pistol, rushing to Richard. "Stop this! You'll kill us all!" Richard shoved her away. "Then die with him!" He scrabbled for the transmitter. Michael moved first. He snatched it, thumb clamping down on the trigger switch. The blinking light turned steady. Armed. Richard froze. Eleanor gasped. Even Jacob and the masked man hesitated, the fight pausing under the weight of imminent death. Michael's voice was ice. "You wanted sacrifice? Here it is. You kill me, you kill yourself. But the data doesn't leave this room." Richard's bravado cracked. His chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temples. "You wouldn't." Michael's eyes never wavered. "Try me." The room held its breath. Then Eleanor moved, her hand snapping out to shove Richard back. "Enough!" she cried. Her body blocked Michael from Richard's aim. Richard roared, raising his pistol. But Jacob, with one final surge, kicked the masked operative into him. Gunfire exploded, echoing through the chamber. Richard staggered, eyes wide, a hole blooming dark in his chest. He collapsed against the servers, sliding down until the green LEDs painted his face an eerie glow. The transmitter slipped from Michael's grip, its light blinking harmlessly now, the circuit broken. Eleanor fell to her knees beside Richard, sobbing, her hands pressed to his chest. "I didn't want this. I just wanted someone to see me." Michael's jaw tightened. He wanted to comfort her, to remember the sister who once stitched soldiers back to life. But the weight of betrayal was too deep. He stepped back, chest heaving, transmitter still clutched. Jacob leaned against a rack, bloodied but alive. "You stopped him," he rasped, "but at a price." Michael looked at Richard's body, at Eleanor's tears, at the ruined servers sparking under their feet. The war was over, but it was only round one in a fight that had no borders, no battlefields, only shadows. Silence reigned in the server chamber after the last shot. The hum of the machines filled the void, as if mocking the lives that had unraveled there. Richard Thorne's body lay crumpled against the glowing racks, his eyes wide but empty. The pistol clattered from his grip, spinning until it rested in a pool of his own blood. Eleanor knelt beside him, trembling hands pressed uselessly against his chest. The Beretta slid from her lap, as she whispered his name again and again, her voice breaking under the weight of futility. "Richard, please, you promised this would fix everything." Michael stood a few feet away, sweat mingling with the blood dripping from a shallow cut on his forehead. His muscles still burned with the tension of combat, but it was the sight of his sister that tore him apart. She had once been the gentle medic who carried bandages into fire, who believed in saving everyone. Now her uniform was betrayal, and her oath lay shattered on the floor beside her. Jacob limped forward, clutching his wounded shoulder. His voice was low but steady. "It's over, Eleanor. There's nothing left to fight for." Eleanor looked up, her face streaked with tears and rage. "Over? Do you think medals and parades erase what they did to me? 15 years, and all it took was one report to erase my service." She slammed her hand against the floor, her voice cracking. "I saved lives, Michael. I deserved better." Michael's reply was calm, but carried a steel edge. "You did deserve better, but you don't buy justice with betrayal. You don't honor sacrifice by selling out those who trusted you." Her gaze flickered between her brother and Richard's lifeless form. Her shoulders sagged. For the first time, her anger dissolved into something rawer, shame. She buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled by the hum of servers that had witnessed everything. Above them, alarms still echoed faintly. Security forces burst into the room, led by Sergeant David Chin. Their weapons swept the chamber until they saw Michael holding the disarmed transmitter. Recognition dawned, and they lowered their rifles. "Sir," David said, voice tight with awe and fear, "we thought we lost you." Michael nodded. "Not today, but we nearly lost far more than me." He gestured toward the ruined consoles, the sparking cables. "Contain this place. No one outside these walls needs to see the wreckage." David's men moved quickly, cuffing the surviving masked operative. Eleanor didn't resist when they bound her wrists, though she couldn't meet her brother's eyes. As they led her away, the crowd in the hall above began to stir with rumors. Whispers spread of a betrayal, of a trap averted by the man they had come to honor. Michael emerged from the sub-basement battered but unbroken, the weight of both victory and loss etched into his features. Richard was gone. Eleanor was disgraced, and the name Thompson, once again, was tied not to scandal or corruption, but to survival. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that night in the Boston Veterans Hall lingered like smoke. The newspapers called it an attempted cyber-terrorist attack, but the official story was polished, stripped of the betrayal and the blood. Richard's name was buried quietly. Eleanor was confined to a military psychiatric facility, where her service record would forever be marked by a single word: treason. Michael carried those truths alone. They weighed on him more than the medals that now gleamed on his shelf. The commendation from the Pentagon, the offers to return to high command, he turned them all down. His place was here among the men and women who needed him, not in the marble halls of Washington. The New England Veteran Center was different after that night. Its walls, once lined with photographs and plaques, now bore the scars of repaired wiring and patched plaster. But to the veterans who gathered there, it had become something more than a community hub. It was a sanctuary. They knew it had been defended not by faceless agencies, but by one of their own, a brother who still carried scars like theirs. One crisp Saturday morning, Michael stepped out into the courtyard where the autumn sun filtered through orange leaves. Susan Rodriguez was there, setting out trays of food for a weekend fundraiser. Beside her, Emily clutched a thick book under her arm, the same one her grandfather had given her, the one that had taught her the courage to write that note. She looked up at Michael with eyes no longer shadowed by fear. "Major," she said softly, "I've been practicing. Grandpa used to say words could save lives. I want to learn more languages. Maybe someday I can help people like you do." Michael knelt down so their eyes met. In her small, determined face, he saw the future he had nearly lost, the reason he had once fought in deserts and jungles, and the reason he still fought now. Not for glory, not for power, for the next generation who deserved a safer world. He placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "Emily, you already saved my life, and not just mine. You saved every veteran whose name was in that database. That kind of courage. It's rarer than medals." She smiled, shy but proud. Behind her, the flag above the courtyard rippled in the cool breeze, catching the morning light. For a moment, Michael let the warmth of the scene wash over him. The wounds of betrayal would never fully heal, but here was proof that hope had not died. He straightened, looking toward the horizon. The city's skyline shimmered in the distance, alive with noise and promise. Emily laughed as her mother called her back inside, the sound clear and bright. Michael breathed deeply. The fight wasn't over. There would always be traps, betrayals, and shadows, but there would also always be children like Emily, carrying the flame forward, and that was enough.